The massive hull of the United Earth Defense Command fell silent as Captain Miller watched his life's work being torn apart by sneers and mockery. The alien delegates, with their sleek environmental suits and glowing neural interfaces, didn't even try to hide their amusement. You propose to defend your world with microscopic robots. The Dominion's lead diplomat's translator couldn't quite hide the incredulous tone. His pearl-white armor gleamed under the hall's bright lights, making him look like a living statue. This is what you wanted to show us. Miller stood firm beside the holographic display, showing thousands of tiny dots swarming in complex patterns. 6 years of research, countless sleepless nights, and more coffee than any human should consume had led to this moment. He glanced at Admiral James, who sat stone-faced among Earth's military leadership. The Swarm Defense Network represents a new approach to space warfare, Miller explained, keeping his voice steady. Each drone is smaller than a grain of sand, but contains advanced processing capabilities and can work in perfect coordination with its neighbors. A rumble of laughter echoed from the alien side of the chamber. Their massive frames, nearly 8 feet tall, shook with what seemed like genuine mirth. The lead diplomat raised a hand, silencing his colleagues. We crossed 50 light years to discuss military cooperation, and you show us dust. He gestured to the window, where one of their warships hung in the sky like a metal mountain. Our smallest weapon systems are larger than your ground vehicles. Our shields can withstand direct hits from solar flares. What could your particles possibly do? Miller tapped his tablet, and a hologram changed to show a simulation. The swarm of dots flowed like water, finding microscopic gaps in shield harmonics, exploiting weaknesses that larger weapons couldn't touch. But the Dominion delegation had already stopped paying attention. Perhaps, their military attaché said, rising to his full height, we should discuss real defense technologies. Our Level 4 shield generators could protect your entire solar system. For a reasonable technology exchange, of course. Admiral James finally spoke up. And what would you want in exchange? Nothing too demanding. Just exclusive mining rights to your outer system planets and unrestricted passage through your space. The alien's smile showed too many teeth. It's a generous offer, considering your current defensive capabilities. Miller wanted to object, to show more simulations, to explain how the swarm could adapt and learn. But Admiral James was already standing, offering diplomatic pleasantries. The meeting was over. As the alien delegation filed out, their mockery continued in their own language. Their universal translators conveniently switched off. But Miller didn't need a translation to understand their head-shaking and gestures. That could have gone better, Admiral James said once they were alone. The old man looked tired, the weight of Earth's defense heavy on his shoulders. They're not even trying to hide their contempt, Miller replied, shutting down his holographic display. Did you see how they looked at us? Like we're children playing with toys. Can you blame them? Their ships are floating cities. Their weapons can crack moons. James ran a hand through his gray hair. The Swarm Project. It's innovative, Miller. But maybe we need to think bigger. Bigger isn't always better. Miller brought up a new hologram, this one showing microscopic images of the actual drones. Nature figured this out billions of years ago. Ants can strip a carcass faster than a lion. Bacteria can bring down creatures thousands of times their size. It's not about raw power. It's about adaptation, cooperation, finding weak points. Poetry won't stop their warships if they decide to turn hostile. James stared out the window at the Dominion vessel that dominated the sky. Its hull seemed to absorb light itself, making it look like a hole torn in reality. The Security Council is pushing for the shield generator deal. Miller packed up his equipment, his movements sharp with frustration. They're looking down on us, Admiral. All their talk of cooperation and protection, they see us as primitives to be managed. And now we're going to give them free rein of our solar system. What choice do we have? James's voice was quiet. Have you seen the classified specs on their ships? One destroyer could devastate Earth's combined fleet. We need their protection, or we need to think differently. Miller pulled up one last image, a microscopic photo of a swarm drone attacking a sample of Dominion hull material. The tests show promise. The swarm can identify structural weaknesses, work together to exploit them. And most importantly, it can learn. The Security Council meets tomorrow to vote on the Dominion's offer. James placed a hand on Miller's shoulder. I'll try to keep some funding for your project, but I can't promise anything. Sometimes we have to work with the reality we have, not the one we want. Miller watched the Admiral leave, then turned back to his display. The simulated swarm swirled in endless patterns, each tiny dot following simple rules that created complex, emergent behaviors. He thought about the Dominion's laughter, their dismissive gestures, their absolute certainty, and their technological superiority. They think size equals power, he muttered to himself, initiating a new simulation. They've forgotten that sometimes the smallest things can change everything. In the depths of his lab, surrounded by humming servers and fabrication units, Miller kept working. The Dominion's mockery had stung, but it had also crystallized something in his mind. Their technology was impressive, yes, but it was also rigid, predictable, reliant on overwhelming force rather than adaptation. The swarm was different. Each drone was simple, almost crude by Dominion standards. But together, linked by advanced algorithms inspired by Earth's own insect colonies, they became something more, something that could learn, adapt, and overcome. As the sun set over the Defense Command complex, Miller received an alert. Another test had finished, this one showing how the swarm responded to simulated Dominion shield frequencies. The results made him smile for the first time that day. The tiny drones hadn't tried to overpower the shields. Instead, they had found the microscopic fluctuations that occurred during power cycles, the split-second variations that more conventional sensors would miss. Like water finding cracks in a dam, they had discovered a way through. Keep laughing, Miller told the distant Dominion ship, its bulk still visible against the darkening sky. We'll see who has the last laugh. He didn't know it then, but those words would prove prophetic sooner than anyone expected. The Dominion's contempt for humanity's primitive technology would soon come back to haunt them, and the tiny drones they had dismissed as dust would teach them a lesson about underestimating humanity's ingenuity. As night fell over Earth's defense headquarters, Miller's swarm continued its endless simulations, learning, adapting, preparing for a confrontation that seemed inevitable. The Dominion might have size and power on their side, but humanity had something they had forgotten how to value: the ability to think differently, to find strength in what others saw as weakness. The real test would come soon enough, and when it did, the laughter would stop. 3 months after the disastrous demonstration, Miller sat in his dimly lit lab, watching live footage from the outer colonies. The Dominion's true nature had finally shown itself, and it was exactly what he had feared. The massive alien warship moved like a shark through the darkness of space, its weapons turning the mining outpost on Europa into molten slag. The defense fleet stationed there hadn't even managed to scratch the invaders' shields. "This is the third attack this week," Admiral James said through the video link, his face haggard from lack of sleep. "They're not even trying to hide their intentions anymore, just moving from colony to colony, taking what they want." Miller nodded, his fingers dancing across his control panel as he adjusted the swarm's combat protocols. "They never planned to protect us. The shield generator deal was just to keep us docile while they positioned their forces. The Security Council finally sees that." James's bitter laugh crackled through the speakers. "Fat lot of good it does us now. They've got ships positioned near every major colony. Our fleet can't even get close without being torn apart." On another screen, Miller watched his latest swarm test results scroll past. The tiny drones had been learning, evolving their tactics through countless simulations. Each failure taught them something new. Each defeat made them stronger. "How's the evacuation going?" he asked, trying to keep the worry from his voice. His sister lived on one of the Mars colonies, right in the path of the Dominion's advance. As well as can be expected, we're moving everyone we can to Earth, but it's slow going. The Dominion keeps accidentally disrupting our transport lanes. James leaned closer to his camera. Please tell me you've got something, Miller. Anything. Miller switched his feed to show the Admiral his latest test results. The swarm's getting better. We've solved the shield penetration problem. The drones can now identify and exploit power fluctuations in under 3 seconds. And once they're through, his demonstration was interrupted by a priority alert. Another Dominion warship had appeared, this one heading straight for the Mars colonies. Miller's heart clenched as he thought of his sister. They're not even making demands anymore, James growled. Just taking whatever they want, destroying whatever they can't use. Classic empire building. Break the resistance before establishing full control. Miller watched the massive ships approach, its weapon systems already powering up. But something caught his eye, a pattern in its shield harmonics that looked familiar. Admiral, he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. That ship, it's the same class as the one they showed us during the demonstration. The one they used to mock us. And their smallest ships can still vaporize our largest bases. What difference does it make? Miller's face broke into a fierce grin. It makes all the difference, because I spent the last 3 months teaching my dust exactly how to eat through those shields. He brought up another display, showing the swarm's current deployment status. 5 launcher platforms had been completed, hidden in orbital installations around Mars. Each contained millions of the microscopic drones, waiting for their chance. Give me permission to launch. Admiral, let's show them what primitive technology can do. James hesitated only for a moment. Do it. At this point, we got nothing to lose. Miller's hands shook slightly as he entered the launch codes. Across the vast distance of space, 5 launchers powered up, their electromagnetic accelerators charging. Launching in 3, 2, 1. The launchers fired, invisible clouds of microscopic machines shooting out at incredible speeds. On his displays, Miller watched the swarm form up, shifting into the attack patterns they had perfected through countless simulations. The Dominion ship didn't even seem to notice them. Why would they? Their sensors were calibrated for real threats, missiles, energy weapons, ships, not dust. Time to shield contact in 15 seconds, Miller reported, his voice tense. Watch the power readings on their port side. The swarm hit the shields like a wave hitting a beach, spreading out, searching for weaknesses. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Miller's sensors lit up. There. Power fluctuation in Section 7. The swarm is through. On the main screen, tiny alerts began appearing all over the Dominion vessel's hull, microscopic points of failure multiplying by the second as the drones did their work. What are they doing? James asked, leaning forward. Exactly what they were designed to do, Miller replied, watching with fierce satisfaction. Working together to take apart something much bigger than themselves, like ants stripping a carcass. The Dominion ship's weapons suddenly powered down. Then its engines began to flicker. Across its massive hull, systems were failing one after another as the swarm attacked critical points. They're trying to power up their backup systems, Miller noted, watching the readings. But the swarm is adapting faster than they can respond. Look, they're starting to panic. Indeed, the alien vessel was now firing wildly into space, trying to hit an enemy too small to target. Emergency pods began launching from its sides as more systems failed. Main power core is destabilizing, Miller reported. They're going to have to shut it down or... The ship's lights went out all at once. It hung in space, dead and dark. Its mighty weapons silenced by enemies it couldn't even see. By all that's holy, James whispered. You did it. You actually did it. Miller was already moving to his next console. The swarm is intact and ready for redeployment. And now they've learned even more about Dominion systems. The next attack will be even faster. Send all your data to the Defense Command immediately. We need to start mass-producing these launchers." James's face had lost its tired look, replaced by fierce determination. The Dominion needs to learn that humanity isn't as helpless as they thought. As Miller prepared the data transfer, his screens lit up with new warnings. 3 more Dominion ships had appeared in the outer system, no doubt responding to their companions' distress calls. "Let them come," he muttered, watching his swarm reposition itself. They thought size and power were everything. Time to teach them about the power of thinking small. The tiny drones moved through space like a glittering cloud, preparing for their next battle. They had been mocked, dismissed as primitive, treated as a joke. But now the laughter had stopped, and the real war was about to begin. In his lab, Miller sent a quick message to his sister on Mars. "Don't worry. The evacuation ships will get through now. We found their weakness." Then he turned back to his controls, ready to show the Dominion exactly how dangerous primitive technology could be. The tiny drones of the swarm moved in perfect coordination, preparing to bring down giants. The age of overwhelming force was over. The era of adaptation and innovation had begun. The news of the Dominion warship's defeat spread through Earth's military command like wildfire. But Miller had no time to celebrate. He stood in the emergency command center, watching dozens of screens showing the massive alien fleet approaching Jupiter's mining colonies. 37 ships. Admiral James announced to the gathered commanders. "The largest Dominion fleet ever assembled in our system. They're not trying to hide their intentions anymore." Miller studied the tactical display, noting the positions of the recently installed swarm launchers around Jupiter's moons. After the success at Mars, they had worked day and night to produce more platforms, but they still didn't have enough for a fleet this size. "They've modified their shields," Miller noted, pointing to the sensor readings. "Trying to block the frequencies we used last time. They learn fast, but not fast enough." James turned to the assembled officers. "The swarm took down one of their ships. Now we have enough launchers to try something bigger." "Miller, show them." Miller stepped forward, bringing up the latest simulation data. "The swarm doesn't just fight, it learns. Each encounter teaches it new tricks. The drones share information, adapt their tactics. The Dominion's shield modifications won't help them." An alert sounded. The alien fleet had begun its attack run. "Mining platform Delta is under fire," someone reported. "Shields failing. They're not even bothering with demands this time." "Launch the swarm," James ordered. "All platforms." Miller's fingers flew across his console. Around Jupiter's moons, 20 launcher platforms hummed to life. Each one carried twice as many drones as the platforms that had defended Mars, and these drones were smarter, faster, more adaptable. Swarm launching in 3, 2, 1. The tiny machines burst from their launchers, spreading out in a glittering cloud that was almost beautiful. The Dominion fleet didn't react at first. Their sensors still hadn't been adjusted to track such small targets. "First wave approaching their front line," Miller reported. "Watch this." The swarm split into smaller groups, each targeting a different ship, but instead of attacking immediately, the drones began moving in complex patterns around the alien vessels. "What are they doing?" James asked. "Learning," Miller replied with a slight smile. "Mapping shield frequencies, finding weaknesses. The Dominion modified their defenses, so the swarm is performing real-time analysis to find new ways in." On the main screen, the first group of drones suddenly surged forward. They flowed through the Dominion shields like water through a sieve, completely ignoring the new defensive modifications. "How?" one of the officers started to ask. "The swarm found harmonic frequencies in their shield grid," Miller explained. "Points where the energy fields overlap and create microscopic gaps. The drones are small enough to slip through." Alarms began blaring on the Dominion ships as their systems started failing. One vessel's engines died, then another's weapons went dark. The massive alien fleet began to break formation as captains tried desperately to shake off the invisible attackers. "They're firing blindly," someone reported with a laugh, using their biggest weapons to try to hit targets too small to see. Miller watched the tactical display with intense focus. The swarm is targeting their command and control systems first this time. They learned that from the Mars encounter. Look, the fleet can't coordinate their defense. The Dominion ships began to scatter, their well-ordered formation dissolving into chaos. Some tried to retreat, others pushed forward aggressively, but none could escape the microscopic hunters that had already breached their defenses. Mining Platform Delta reports the enemy fire has stopped, an officer announced. All attacking ships have gone dark. A cheer went up in the command center, but Miller held up his hand. "Wait, something's wrong." The swarm is detecting unusual power readings from the Dominion flagship. The massive alien vessel at the center of the fleet had stopped moving. Its shields were pulsing with strange patterns, and energy readings were off the charts. "They're overloading their core," Miller realized with horror, trying to generate an electromagnetic pulse to kill the swarm. The Dominion flagship began to glow with building energy. They were willing to sacrifice their most powerful ship just to destroy the tiny drones that had humbled them. But the swarm had other plans. "Look," James pointed at the display. The drones were moving in new patterns, forming complex geometric shapes around the dying flagship. "They're adapting again," Miller explained, watching in awe, using the metal in their own bodies to create electromagnetic channels, redirecting the pulse energy. The flagship's core detonated in a massive burst of light. For a moment, everyone in the command center held their breath, waiting to see if their microscopic defenders had survived. Then the sensor readings stabilized. The swarm was not only intact but had grown stronger. The drones had absorbed the electromagnetic energy, using it to power their systems. "Impossible," one of the officers whispered. "No," Miller corrected him. "Adaptation. Evolution. The swarm learns from every attack, every defense. The Dominion thought they could overwhelm it with raw power. But they just made it stronger," James finished. The remaining alien ships were retreating now, their mighty weapons useless against an enemy they had once mocked as primitive. The swarm followed at a distance, gathering data, learning more about their opponents with every passing moment. In the command center, celebrations began as reports came in from the Jupiter colonies. Not a single mining platform had been lost, not one human life sacrificed. The mighty Dominion fleet had been defeated by an enemy they couldn't even see. Miller stepped away from his console, finally allowing himself to feel tired. "They'll be back," he said quietly to James, "with new weapons, new defenses. They won't give up easily." "Let them come," the Admiral replied. "The swarm will be ready. And next time we'll be even stronger," Miller finished. "Every battle teaches us. And the swarm, something new. The Dominion still thinks in terms of brute force, but we've learned a better way." As if to emphasize his point, the tactical display showed the swarm regrouping, the tiny drones moving in ever more complex patterns as they processed everything they had learned from the battle. The Dominion had come to their system expecting to find primitive weaklings. Instead, they had found an enemy that grew stronger with every attack, an enemy that turned their own power against them. The real war was just beginning. But now, at last, humanity had hope. The emergency alarm woke Miller from his first real sleep in days. Red lights flashed through his lab as he rushed to his station, already knowing what he would see on the screens. The Dominion had returned, but this time they had brought their pride and joy. The Starbreaker, a warship so massive it cast a shadow on Earth from high orbit. "I was wondering when they'd send it," Admiral James said, his face grim on the video feed. "Their legendary flagship, the ship that broke the resistance of 12 different species." Miller studied the sensor readings with growing concern. The Starbreaker was unlike anything they'd faced before. Its hull was covered in constantly shifting energy patterns, and its shields operated on principles their sensors could barely understand. They've been holding back until now, Miller noted, watching the massive vessels approach. All those other ships were just testing us, gathering data on the swarm. And now they think they're ready. James looked older than ever. We've got reports from our deep space sensors. There's a whole invasion fleet waiting at the edge of the system. If the Starbreaker breaks through our defenses. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what would follow. Miller turned to another screen, where the swarm status was displayed. The tiny drones had been busy since the Jupiter battle, replicating and evolving. New variants had emerged, each one specializing in different tasks. Some were built for speed, others for shield penetration, still others for coordinating their siblings. The swarm has changed, Miller said, bringing up detailed scans. Look at these movement patterns. They're nothing like our original programming. On the display, millions of drones moved in fluid formations that seemed almost organic. They flowed like schools of fish, divided and reformed like amoebas, created complex geometric patterns that shouldn't have been possible with their simple programming. They've developed their own tactics, James realized. Their own way of thinking. Exactly. We built them to learn, to adapt. But they've gone beyond that. Miller searched for the right word. They're innovating. A new alert cut through their conversation. The Starbreaker had begun its attack run. All Earth defense stations, prepare for combat, James ordered through the command channel. Swarm launchers stand by. This is what we've been preparing for. Miller's fingers flew across his console, but the swarm was already moving. The drones had detected the threat and were organizing themselves without waiting for commands. Look at this, Miller said, pointing to a tactical display. The swarm was forming new patterns he'd never seen before, creating layered formations that somehow reminded him of the neural networks in a human brain. The Starbreaker fired its first shot, a beam of energy so powerful it turned the air to plasma where it passed. But the swarm was already moving, the drones flowing around the beam like water around a rock. They're learning even faster now, Miller reported, watching in amazement. Analyzing the Starbreaker's weapon signatures, adapting their strategies in real time. The massive alien ship fired again and again, each shot powerful enough to vaporize a conventional warship. But the swarm was impossible to hit, its countless tiny components moving with impossible coordination. Then the drones began their counterattack. They didn't charge straight in like they had with previous ships. Instead, they created complex interference patterns, their tiny bodies generating overlapping energy fields that probed the Starbreaker's defenses. What are they doing? James asked. Something new, Miller replied, watching the sensor readings with growing excitement. They're not trying to find gaps in the shields anymore. They're creating their own gaps. The swarm's energy patterns were interacting with the Starbreaker's shields, creating cascade failures that the giant ship's computers couldn't compensate for fast enough. Holes appeared in the supposedly impenetrable defenses, growing larger by the second. The Starbreaker's commanders weren't fools. They began emergency shield modifications, trying to adapt to this new threat. But for every countermeasure they deployed, the swarm developed two new attacking strategies. This isn't just adaptation anymore, Miller said quietly. This is evolution happening in real time. The drones that made it through the shields didn't immediately attack the ship's systems like before. Instead, they began creating new formations on the hull itself, generating energy patterns that somehow interfered with the Starbreaker's internal power distribution. They're turning the ship's own power against it, Miller realized, using its energy emissions to power their attacks. The bigger they made their ship, the more vulnerable it is to the swarm, James finished. All that power, all that size, working against them. The Starbreaker's mighty engines began to flicker as power failures cascaded through its systems. Its weapons, capable of cracking planets, fell silent. The giant ship began to drift, its crew helpless against enemies too small to fight. But the swarm wasn't finished. The drones were still evolving, still learning. They created new formations around the dying ship, patterns so complex they almost hurt to look at. Energy readings are off the charts, someone reported. The swarm is building something. Miller watched in awe as the tiny machines transformed the Starbreaker's own energy emissions into a web of pure force, trapping the mighty vessel in a cage of its own power. "Send the surrender demand," James ordered. "Let's end this before." He was cut off by a new alert. The invasion fleet at the edge of the system had begun to move, but not toward Earth. They were retreating, running from the power they had witnessed. The Starbreaker, pride of the Dominion fleet, hung helpless in space, its mighty bulk contained by enemies it had once dismissed as insignificant. The giants had fallen to the power of the infinitesimally small. In his lab, Miller watched the swarm continue its work, still adapting, still evolving. They had created something that went beyond mere weapons, a new form of life, born from human ingenuity and strengthened by alien arrogance. "They thought size meant power," he said softly. "They never understood that true strength comes from adaptation, from learning, from working together." The swarm glittered in Earth's orbit, a cloud of tiny defenders that had grown into humanity's greatest achievement. They had been mocked, dismissed, underestimated. But now, at last, the laughter had stopped. 1 month after the Starbreaker's defeat, Miller stood in the same presentation hall where the Dominion had once mocked his work. But this time, the alien delegates weren't laughing. Their environmental suits seemed less sleek now, their postures less confident as they watched the swarm demonstrations. "As you can see," Miller explained, gesturing to the holographic display, "the drones continue to evolve. Each generation develops new capabilities we never programmed into them." He didn't add that this fact terrified as many humans as aliens. The Dominion's lead diplomat, a different one than before, watched the display with obvious unease. The tiny dots moved in patterns that seemed to defy physics, creating structures and formations that nobody had thought possible. "Your weapon system has exceeded all expectations," the diplomat admitted. The translator couldn't quite hide the mix of fear and respect in his voice. "The High Command wishes to discuss terms." Admiral James, sitting beside Miller this time, nodded slowly. "We're listening. The Dominion proposes a full military withdrawal from your solar system. All claims to mining rights and passage routes will be abandoned." The diplomat's fingers twitched nervously as a particularly complex swarm pattern formed in a hologram. "In exchange, we request technological cooperation." Miller couldn't help but smile at the irony. "You want us to share our primitive technology." The diplomat's suit changed color slightly, their version of a blush. "The Dominion has reconsidered its assessment of Earth's technological capabilities. Your approach to defense systems is unique." "You mean it works," James said flatly. "It works better than ships the size of cities and weapons that can crack planets." On the display, the swarm continued its endless dance of adaptation and evolution. The drones were different now. Some had developed new structures. Others had found ways to combine their capabilities in ways Miller still didn't fully understand. They had become more than weapons. They were a new form of life, born from humanity's drive to survive. "We're prepared to offer significant concessions," the diplomat continued. "Access to our faster-than-light technology, medical advancements, energy production systems. The same things you offered before." Miller interrupted. "When you thought you could just take what you wanted anyway." The alien's translator crackled with uncomfortable static. "The situation has changed. The Starbreaker's defeat has forced us to reconsider many things. Your swarm technology represents a fundamental shift in military doctrine." Miller looked at James, who gave a slight nod. They had discussed this moment, planned for it. "The swarm isn't just a weapon," Miller said, bringing up new displays showing the drone's evolutionary patterns. "It's a proof of concept, a demonstration that bigger isn't always better. That adaptation and cooperation can overcome raw power." The hologram shifted to show footage from the Starbreaker battle. The mighty ship's weapons, capable of devastating entire fleets, proved useless against enemies too small to target. Its massive power core, once a symbol of Dominion superiority, had only made it more vulnerable to the swarm's adaptive attacks. Your entire civilization is built on the idea of overwhelming force, Miller continued. Bigger ships, stronger weapons, more powerful shields. But nature learned a different lesson billions of years ago. The most successful organisms aren't always the biggest or strongest. They're the ones that can adapt, work together, find new solutions to problems. The diplomat watched the battle footage in silence. The Starbreaker's final moments played out. The pride of the Dominion fleet, helpless against a cloud of microscopic machines that had once been dismissed as primitive. "We understand now," the diplomat said finally. "Your technology represents more than just a new weapon. It's a different way of thinking." "Exactly." Miller shut down the hologram. "So before we discuss any technology sharing, we need to know that you understand what you're asking for. This isn't about trading weapons. It's about changing how you approach problems." The alien delegation conferred among themselves in their own language. Miller used the moment to study them more closely. Their body language was different now, less rigid, less certain. The defeat of their mighty fleet had shaken them deeply. "The Dominion is prepared to learn," the lead diplomat said finally. "Our reliance on overwhelming force has made us inflexible. Your swarm has shown us that there are other paths to strength." James leaned forward. "And the other species in your territory, the ones you've been protecting with your superior technology." More uncomfortable shifting among the delegates. They will be granted full autonomy, with the option to join a new cooperative alliance. No more forced protectorates. Miller nodded slowly. The swarm had done more than just defend Earth. It had forced an entire civilization to reconsider its fundamental assumptions about power and progress. "Then we can begin discussions," he said. "But remember, the swarm continues to evolve. Every day, it develops new capabilities, new ways of thinking. We're still learning what it can do." As if to emphasize his point, the hologram flickered back to life without anyone touching the controls. The swarm's latest patterns played across the display, more complex and beautiful than ever. They activated the system themselves, Miller explained to the startled delegates. They've begun making their own decisions, finding their own ways to communicate. We don't control them anymore. We work with them. The diplomats watched the display with a mixture of fear and fascination. The tiny dots that they had once mocked as primitive now moved with an intelligence that defied explanation, creating patterns that seemed to hint at possibilities nobody had imagined. "Perhaps," the lead diplomat said slowly, "that is the first lesson we need to learn. The difference between control and cooperation." Miller smiled. The giants of the galaxy had finally learned to look closer, to see the strength that could exist in the very small. Their laughter had turned to respect, their mockery to genuine desire to understand. The swarm continued its endless dance in the hologram, each tiny drone part of something greater than itself. They had been created to defend humanity, but they had become something more, a bridge between ways of thinking, a proof that the path to the future didn't always require brute force. In the depths of space, millions more drones moved in their complex patterns, watching, learning, evolving. They had once been dismissed as insignificant, but they had changed the course of history. Sometimes, Miller reflected, the smallest things really did make the biggest difference.